people who can read and write well have a special skill because it helps them to be able to think better and talk about many different topics. And it also helps people to understand different points of view. And understanding different points of view makes you good at conversation, which makes our society more democratic. So other people's opinions matter, and then you can take part in important discussions. So literacy is so much broader than just being able to read.
Hey there, and welcome to the Speechy Side Up podcast. My name is Vanita Litvack, and I am so grateful you're here. I'm an ASHA certified speech language pathologist, author, and augmentative and alternative communication consultant who is obsessed with helping SLPs like you stop reinventing the wheel and connect with other SLPs in the trenches. Have you ever wondered how other SLPs seem to be doing it all with ease? Well, around here, you'll get to hear firsthand how SLPs are really getting things done while keeping evidence-based practice and self-care in mind. Think of this as a coffee date with your SLP friends. Get ready to be challenged and encouraged while we learn together. Today, I'm joined by Britney Morrish. Britney is a speech language pathologist and the owner and founder of Language and Literacy Clinic of Manitoba, based out of Manitoba, Canada. Through her clinic, she has dedicated herself to providing guidance to caregivers and educators on best practices in literacy. Her clinic works with parents, caregivers, educators, schools, districts, and private groups to provide comprehensive initial and follow-up training and coaching to support those adopting and using a structured literacy framework. Their mission is to bridge the gap between research and practice, ensuring that every child receives an education tailored to their unique cognitive needs. Brittany, thank you so much for coming today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited.
So, do you feel like that covers everything, or is there anything else you want to add before we talk about structured literacy interventions?
I feel like it covers kind of the clinic side of things. If people want to know me a little bit better, I have three kids of my own. So I have a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, and an 11-year-old. And I really love the outdoors. So anything to do with gardening, camping, anything like that. And I think maybe just to kind of preface the talk a little bit, I will say that people who can read and write well have a special skill because it helps them to be able to think better and talk about many different topics. And it also helps people to understand different points of view. And understanding different points of view makes you good at conversation, which makes our society more democratic. So other people's opinions matter, and then you can take part in important discussions. So literacy is so much broader than just being able to read.
Literacy is so complex,
It
right?
really, really is. Yeah,
It's so complex.
there's so many little skills and components that go into literacy that it's hard to describe without having a big, long conversation about it.
Yeah. And I was talking to somebody recently about how it has to be explicitly taught. Like a lot of the things in speech language pathology, we can be done through play-based learning and they kind of just learn it naturally. And of course, there are aspects of reading where that can happen, but there are other aspects of reading that have to be explicitly taught.
Yes, for sure. There's not as much implicit learning in literacy.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Super interesting. So how would you define structured literacy and what distinguishes it from other approaches to teaching reading?
So, structured literacy is an evidence based approach to teaching reading. And like you touched on there, it's systematic, it's sequential, and it's explicit. So, it focuses on teaching those foundational skills of reading, including phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, but it does that in a structured and cumulative manner. What distinguishes it from other approaches to reading is that emphasis on breaking down language into its component parts and teaching each of those parts explicitly. So it does include teaching the relationships between sounds and letters, so phonics, right? And also the rules and conventions of spelling and pronunciation, but it also includes language structures. So teaching syntax systematically or targeting vocabulary systematically. All of that falls under structured literacy.
Okay, got you. It does it have anything to do with Orton Gillingham or is it its own approach?
Yeah, Orton Gillingham is a type of structured literacy, and that's like an approach or a methodology. And Orton Gillingham often gets called like the gold standard in decoding intervention. And actually, there's not a lot of research that says that it is the gold standard. So, structured literacy, I think, brings in new research faster, like because structured literacy isn't a particular approach, it's just following the science of reading, if you've heard that term before, right? Following the new science that comes along and incorporating it as it happens, whereas Orton Gillingham is a more specific approach.
Okay. Like a Linda Bell might be.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, this is all very new to me, the mom of a toddler who is, not starting to read, but getting interested in like letter sounds.
Yeah.
And I just took a course recently, which I thought was really fascinating. But the whole premise of the course was that you can teach like toddlers to read by just teaching them the phonics, like the letter sounds, and then
Right.
having them blend like two letter words, then three-letter words. And then we don't get like he doesn't talk about like the rest of reading, but do you feel like that it could work that way? Like, yes?
Yeah, I mean, it can work that way. If we're talking about like your average toddler who hopefully is actually interested in it, because we don't
Yeah.
want to work on explicitly teaching letter names and letter sounds to kids who aren't ready for it. So, starting around kindergarten age, whether they are showing readiness or not, we're going to do it. But yeah, it really does start at being able to blend two-letter sounds and then three-letter sounds. And then as they get older, moving through, say, kindergarten, then you get towards the end of kindergarten into digraphs. So your SH and your CH and your TH, CK, right? Those kind of rules. And then as they get a little bit older, then you're going to teach them that if you add an E at the end of the word, then that's going to change the vowel sound. So that's why it has to be cumulative, right? Like they need to know those short vowel sounds and understand them pretty solidly before they're going to be able to move into the other ones. When you asked before about the Orton Gillingham approach, there is often a level of like even people who are trained in, say, Barton or Wilson, that are programs that are based on an Orton Gillingham approach. There's this element of mastery often in those kind of approaches. And there's neuro research that talks about interleaving. And so that's basically you teach the concept, but they don't have to fully master it before you teach, say, the next letter name or the letter sound, right? Because in your next lesson, you're going to still go back. It's kind of like we used to call it looping, right? Interleaving and looping aren't exactly the same thing, but they're similar enough that it's easier to talk about them like that. But yeah, you're coming back to that same topic over and over and over again, but you're introducing new topics as you go. Because so if I give a specific example, let's say we've already taught SATP, right? It's not going to hurt that child to add I,
Okay.
right? Because you're still going to practice words that have SATP in them. You're just also practicing words that have I in them.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't know where he got it from, but basically there's the mastered column, the almost column, and the not yet. And then the mastered ones we introduce again every day, just to kind of like you were saying, interleaving. Is that what you said?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So every day we look at the mastered ones, and then the almost are the next two to three that we're like doing during play, introducing games around those sounds. And then once one of those goes into mastered, every day we're like reviewing them again, but then we're working on another one.
Grab another new one. Yeah. Yeah. That is following the practices of structured literacy.
Got it. Okay. It's so cool. No wonder you like it. I
Yeah,
love
it's
like
really cool watching like a brain figure it out, right? Like
yeah.
my 5-year-old, he's not in kindergarten yet. So we just same thing. Like we just play with letters and things, but it's the same kind of idea that you're talking about. Like I know which letters he's mastered, which
Yeah.
ones he's got some of the time, and which ones we haven't really covered yet. Like I haven't done QU with him yet, right? Because he doesn't really know many words other than maybe quiet,
Right.
right? That have a QU, that sound in them, right? It's not very valuable to him yet, but we're able to then, do games and activities and things with him, play Play-Doh and use little letter. He loves stamps and letter in the Play-Doh and things like that. And he's having fun with it. And it's not, sitting down drill-based format. Lots of people think that when you say structured literacy instead of something like balanced literacy, people think that kids are like sitting down, pen and paper, drill and kill, that kind of thing. And that's just not the way it is.
Mm. I'm glad you made that distinction because I definitely think people who are listening, some people might think that way.
Yeah.
All right. So, are there components or principles of structured literacy, and why are they considered essential for effective reading instruction?
Yeah. So there are sort of essential pieces of structured literacy. If you're thinking of structured literacy for decoding, there are essential components of a decoding lesson plan. So you want to make sure that you're always working on both reading and spelling. And you want to work on it at the sound level, at the word level, at the phrase level, and then in connected text. If you think of it almost kind of like an articulation session, right? As soon as they get even some remote mastery of that sound, you're going to go all the way across where you're doing it, sometimes in words, sometimes in sentences, sometimes multiple word sentences. So it's the same kind of idea, really, in a structured literacy lesson plan for decoding. When we're thinking about structured literacy more broadly, where it's encompassing like language structures as well, there's lots of different models of reading. And so you might have heard of like Scarborough's Rope by Hollis Scarborough, or The Simple View of Reading by Goff and Tubner. The newest one that's come about is called The Active View of Reading. And so it's by Nell Duke and Kelly Cartwright. If you ever have a chance to see Nell Duke speak, or just like find some YouTube videos, she's wonderful. She does a much better job of explaining her own model than I'm going to do. So definitely look for her. But the active view of reading, the way that it differs from prior models is that it also takes into account all of the components that a reader brings to the task, or a writer brings to the task. So their own ability to self-regulate, their own executive functioning skills, their own ability to use strategies. So those strategies could be like to be able to sit still in their chair, but it could also be like remembering that we use CK at the end of a word that has a short vowel in it, right? Their ability to remember those things. And then it also accounts for things that she calls, or they call, I guess they're two researchers, they call them bridging processes. So in Scarborough's Rope and The Simple View, they really take decoding, so like word level abilities, and language comprehension as two separate things. And in the active view, they talk about how those things overlap and how there's different processes, like reading fluency that brings you from decoding into comprehending, and also from comprehending to be able to decode better. And things like morphology and the vocabulary knowledge that you bring to the task, those are bridging processes. So you need all of these things together to get to reading. When we're actually intervening on it, then we need to kind of account for all of those areas, right? So we need to do an assessment to figure out where the process might be breaking down. And then once we've done our assessment, we're going to work on those things. So if we're working on decoding, structured literacy does put a strong emphasis on phonics skills. So that's what you're talking about really with your daughter, is phonics skills, right? Teaching kids that relationship between letters and sounds systematically and explicitly. It also includes phonemic awareness. Something that might be new to some of our SLP listeners is that I know in grad school, I learned about phonemic awareness being something that you can do in the dark, right? So you can close your eyes, and it's that ability to play with sounds. There is research, I was going to say newer research, but it's actually not all that new. It's like 20 years old at this point, that says that we really need to be using letters at the same time as we're doing that. So if you're asking a kid to blend together the sounds at, you should really have the letters S, A, and T in front of them. And then they can see that you're actually like pushing those letters together to make that word. And then that word is a meaningful unit. And then if you take out the T and you put in a, that makes a brand new word. So they physically see that it makes a brand new word, but it also means something entirely different. So they understand that that T and that P are meaningful units of the word. Structured literacy also is going to focus on fluency. So fluency in this, in the reading world, fluency is not what SLPs think of often when we're thinking of stuttering, but it's your ability to read text accurately, quickly, and with expression. And repeatedly reading text is what's really going to help with fluency. And if students are more automatic in their decoding skills, then they're going to be more fluent readers, but they're also going to be able to comprehend, to understand what they have read a lot better, right? It also encompasses vocabulary development, syntax, comprehension strategies, And when we talk about comprehension strategies, it's not necessarily the old school way. Like for a long time, when the National Reading Panel first came out with its report in 2000, comprehension strategies were shown to be one of the best ways to target comprehension. And so, as we always do in education, we went off the deep end with it. And then we had classrooms learning all about inferencing. So it'd be like the month of May is inferencing. We're all going to learn how to inference really well. Now May is done and we're going to move on to finding the main idea, right? And that didn't actually help students to be able to understand those texts in front of them, because what they were trying to learn was just inferencing as this nebulous skill, right? Now we know that that skill needs to be attached to meaning, to background knowledge. So the point of inferencing is so that you can better understand whatever text is sitting in front of you. And yeah, so then we want to integrate everything that we're doing with structured literacy into what's happening in the classroom. And that was a very, very long answer to your question. I apologize.
Well, I just have to say it's kind of frustrating, like now being a parent, seeing how the education system has kind of swung the pendulum over the years, every which way, and it really hurts our kids.
It
So,
does.
where are you seeing the most common breakdown with children who are coming for reading help?
I would say early years, I'm seeing the breakdown in phonics skills. So for the longest time, we had researchers telling us that balanced literacy or whole language was the way to go. So whole language was the thing, and then they realized whole language didn't really work. And so they came up with this term balanced literacy that was supposed to be more of a balance, right? It sounds great. It sounds like, okay, we're going to do some language things and we're going to do some decoding things. It's really what we're talking about now for structured literacy. But the problem with balanced literacy is that there was never really a balance. And so everyone got to decide how much phonics they wanted to teach, how much vocabulary they wanted to teach, right? And so there was no real like sort of regulation around that. Not that I'm advocating for there to be any type of regulation of classroom teachers in that way, but I think there just was a really broad misunderstanding of what was going to help our kids to learn how to read. And so now we're getting into this movement of following the science.
Mhm.
And I think it's really great, but people need to not get stuck again, because science changes all the time, right? Like the phonemic awareness thing that I just talked about. For the first 10 years of my career as an SLP, I taught phonemic awareness without letter names, without letter tiles,
Mhm.
right? I literally just said the sounds, and we did all sorts of manipulation tasks and, rhyming and segmenting and blending and things like that. And yeah, it was probably helping my students some, right? But had I known and incorporated letters, I would be helping them more. So now I've read this research and now I'm able to incorporate it better.
Mhm.
Right. So I hope that we're moving in this direction of people understanding that we basically have to tweak and change our practices constantly. When we learn new information, you know better, you do better. It's the same thing that we just say to parents, right? There's so many things that I messed up, still continue to mess up with my own kids, right? But like maybe I messed it up with kid number one, maybe I messed it up not quite so bad with kid number two, and now we're on kid number three, and I'm like, okay, I know how to teach that thing,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, you hope that people will actually use the science. And I think that that's a gap too, in that educators in general just don't know how to read like research articles. We need people whose jobs it is to translate research into practice.
Mhm. Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I think that sometimes teachers are at the mercy of whatever the school districts decides is gonna be the curriculum, and if that curriculum is outdated or it's using, practices for where the research was maybe 20 years ago, that's where things become problematic too.
Yeah, and I think I understand why some like state legislators and things like that are starting to mandate certain curriculums, right? Or they're saying like we're going to endorse these particular science of reading based curriculums. But I think they're not necessarily the right people to be doing that,
Mhm.
right? Because if you mandate, like you said, you mandate a curriculum, and maybe it is like let's just assume that that curriculum today is based on the most up to date research. Well, something else comes along, maybe next week, a different article gets published, and it actually disproves step number 3 of everything that's in that curriculum. Well, there's no option then for teachers to be able to incorporate that new science,
Right.
right? So, yeah, there needs to be some leeway in allowing educators to be able to have some say over what they're doing, as long as what they're doing, they can back up what they're doing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if we're going to get to this. I think that this is still on topic. If you're getting somebody in for the first time, what are your steps for assessment and treatment with them? Just kind of like broad overview.
Broad overview. Okay. So, I mean, usually I'm going to talk to parents right away and find out, okay, is there a family history of any language or literacy disorders, any speech sound disorders, right? Kids who have like major speech sound disorders are at much higher risk of getting a diagnosis of dyslexia when they're older. I'm going to, I treat school age students. So I'm going to talk to their classroom teacher and I'm going to find out their history of having difficulty with reading and writing and also with math. I want to know if they are having difficulty with math because there's so many language concepts that happen in math, right? And then I usually go into a classroom and do a classroom observation. So I try to hit a time when they're going to be doing some form of classroom discussion. And I try usually to just be like a fly on the wall. I don't want that kid to know that I'm coming to see them just yet, but I alert the classroom teacher so that they can, you know, ask that student a particular question. And then I start to get this feel for, okay, can they answer questions that came directly from the text? Can they draw on information that the classroom teacher taught last week? And now we're just going back to it in this science lesson. So I'm just starting to get a bit of a feel for that. Then I usually introduce myself to the student and we just do a quick like, hey, I'm going to come see you on another day. Like, I'm Brittany, you know, luckily I work in a small rural school division. So the kids have seen me, even if I haven't directly worked with them, they've seen me in their schools and things like that. So I'm usually not like a complete stranger. And then from there, like I do some components of like a language assessment. So I usually do informal narrative assessment first to see if I'm going to need to dig deeper into like vocabulary and grammar. Sometimes I'll do like a MAVA, so the Montgomery Assessment of Vocabulary Acquisition. Usually I'll use like the SLAM cards. I'm sorry, I can't remember what something language acquisition measures, something like that. They're free cards for doing narratives. So seeing if they're able to like sequence a story, those kind of things. And then I almost always do a tower, the test of word reading efficiency, and a PAST, which is the phonemic awareness screening test. I still really like the PAST. I know lots of people are calling the PAST into question because of the activities that are then paired with it if you're going to use those for assessment. I personally like the PAST because it's a timed phonemic awareness assessment, and lots of the other ones that are available out there, like the one that's part of the TILs, isn't timed. And so you don't get that aspect of automaticity with it. So yeah, I usually do all those. And then I'm starting to weed out, okay, do I need to do more of like a language assessment or do I need to do more decoding? Do I need to do both? What's going on for this student here? And then if I'm going to do both, I'm generally going to use the TILs. I really, really like the TILs because it breaks it down so well into reading and writing, and it breaks it into like sound level versus text level. So it allows me then to be able to make a diagnostic call on whether the student in front of me has dyslexia, they have developmental language disorder, are they struggling in both areas because there's a 50% overlap between those two disorder areas. And then it has, a couple of those like working memory, the digit span forward and backwards and things like that. And also if I have any concerns about things like ADHD or things like that, I'll draw in and call in my partner in crime, our school psychologist, and see. Sometimes we'll do a joint assessment. So then she'll look more at those attention pieces. Sometimes we'll do that right off the bat, like, because she also does literacy assessments. If I'm noticing when I'm doing that classroom observation that there are a lot of things that call into question memory or attention, then usually those students are going to go to her to get an assessment because she's better able to figure out, is the reason they're having difficulty with reading because of attention, whereas my assessments are not going to tell me those kind of things. Yeah, so those are like the formal assessment tools that I'll generally use. I mean, I'll pull in, I actually like the test for reception of grammar, which is out of the UK. I used to use the SPELT and I really, really hated it. And so I was just searching for something about grammar. And this really tells you whether they understand complex sentence types. So it is reception. It's a receptive language test. Doesn't get at expressive grammar as much, but I feel like I get a handle on expressive grammar from the narrative assessment. And then, yeah, from there, I kind of like draw it all together and get this picture of, is it more of a word level difficulty? Is it more of a text level difficulty? Is it in writing? Like sometimes kids have more of a dysgraphia profile where they're having more difficulty with spelling and writing, but their reading and reading fluency is okay. So yeah, you kind of have to like piece it all apart. And even though the TILs, it will say like this child has met the criteria for a language literacy disorder, sometimes it's one odd subtest that'll pull them down really far. Like I find often kids have a really hard time with the following directions subtest on the TILs because when you do it, the paper is covered up in front of them, so they have to hold that information in their memory. So then I might do like following directions on the self, just to check, okay, do they actually have difficulty with following directions, or do they do better if they have the materials in front of them? And if that's the case, maybe I'm giving classroom-based recommendations that say, make sure they have the materials in front of them before you give a classroom direction, or make sure they have a task breakdown of what all the things are, or do a turn and talk with their peers after you give the instruction. All partner A's turn to partner B and tell them what the instruction just was, those kind of things. So yeah, I mean, it's a big process. It's a lot bigger than when I popped out of grad school and just did selfs on everybody.
Yeah.
But I feel like it gives a lot better picture of what's going wrong for them. And then we can provide the right types of interventions at school, and parents are able to seek outside supports if needed and things like that.
Well, thank you for giving that whole explanation and kind of rundown of what it looks like for you. I think that that is really helpful for anybody who's interested in getting started or, has clients on their caseload that have reading or writing difficulties. So it gives them some ideas of where to start.
Yeah, for sure.
So in your opinion, what are some misconceptions or myths surrounding structured literacy?
I would say that the media does like to portray structured literacy as just phonics. And I mean, rightly so that there does need to be a big push for phonics. We lost phonics for a long time, right? But it's not the whole picture. So we just want to be really careful about which experts we follow, right? We want to make sure that the people that we're listening to are people who are actually doing research in the field, or people who are translating that research, but they can actually back up their claims. So like I would literally just 2 weeks ago was giving a presentation and I was talking about reading fluency, and somebody said, hey, you just said repeated reads are really important for fluency, but I thought I read that repeated reads were a bad idea. And I've been telling everybody not to do repeated reads. Like, can you give me some research on that? And I said, absolutely. Like, I can't just spout off titles. Depends on what we're talking about. Sometimes I can spout off people, but fluency I couldn't necessarily. But I said, you know what? I've got tons of articles on my computer. So once I get back to my office, then I went through those articles and I, sent off a few to this particular person and just said, if you have any questions, or if you have, like, she obviously had read a research article that said not to do repeated readings. And I said, well, I haven't read that one. So if you have it, send it my way. In this case, there hasn't been a back and forth dialogue yet, but that is how I generally do it because I can't possibly have read everything that's out there, right? So I've read, 17 different fluency articles, and of those 17 different fluency articles, 4 of them showed evidence for repeated reads. For me, that's enough to say, yeah, I'm going to give it a go and see how it works for my students. If even one of the articles in there said, don't do repeated reads, I'd be digging in further to see why, right? But of those ones that I read, nothing said, don't do repeated reads. So, I mean, that's just a little example of it, but people need to be able to back up their claims.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I'm just thinking, why wouldn't repeated reads be, or why would they be a bad thing? Did she tell you the argument?
Yeah, so she didn't tell me the article. What she was saying was that she had read that they don't transfer. So repeated reads, you do get better fluency on that passage, but then you go to a cold read on a new passage and you're not going to get transfer. And I don't believe that to be accurate because I've done the reading on it and I found other articles that have said that no, it does transfer to cold reads. And also I've used fluency interventions with students. So I've been able to use, like, we use Dibbles, which is a free online tool to screen students. And then if they have poor oral reading fluency scores, but their decoding level skills are okay, then usually it's like, well, we need to be working on rate and accuracy and speed, right? It's more about like automaticity of those skills that they have. And so then what we do is we do repeated reads with them attempting to get faster. You don't want to go so fast that they're like, and you can't actually understand them anymore. But if they speed up their rate, they then have better comprehension scores, right? And so when you do the next Dibbles assessment, those are always cold reads. But if you're able to see that their fluency scores are actually going up, then what we're doing is working, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Interesting. It doesn't seem like it would hurt from what she
Right,
said.
right.
Yeah.
And like there's also things like that where it's like maybe the thing doesn't hurt, but there's also something better, right?
Yeah.
Because part of this conversation came around fluency ladders. So like those things that look like are fluency triangles, they're called sometimes, and it'll be like and then it'll be like dog sat dog sat on a log, right? And I was talking about how there isn't a lot of research that says that those are effective because what you're doing is having them practice the easier words, right? A dog, right? A dog sat. I mean, that maybe isn't the best example because that student's probably working on consonant vowel consonant words, right? But they're practicing the most in all of that, right? And we assume that is something that they've got pretty quick at this point. And so she was saying, well, I've used fluency ladders and I found them effective. And so all I was saying is, yeah, you found that effective. And there might be something that's even more effective, right? So we might be able to do something that gives you even more value. So sometimes, even though something can be effective, it might not be as effective as something else.
Got it. It almost seems like in that case, it becomes like a sight word type of reading, whereas like what you were describing with the repeated readings, if they have like good phonics abilities, like it should translate over, right?
Right. And that's what when we were having this conversation, I was saying, if you're using those as a decoding support, you have a different purpose for them, right? And you're trying to increase that student's ability to fluently read a sentence. We're not really talking about reading fluency then. We're talking about just making meaning of a sentence then, right? And so really your goal from that is decoding, not fluency, right? And so it might be perfectly fine to use fluency ladders or fluency triangles, whatever you want to call them, for decoding. I haven't read research specific to that, so I'm not going to say yay or nay.
Yeah. Oh, this is so good. I'm like so fascinated by this topic and I appreciate your passion for it because
Yeah.
you can tell you know a lot about it, which is really appreciated.
Thank you.
So, in your experiences, what challenges do educators commonly face when implementing structured literacy and how can these challenges be addressed?
I think the biggest challenge is that most people were never taught this information, right? And so at best, they may have received some of the information when they're on like practicums, right? But universities really aren't teaching structured literacy yet. It's slowly changing, but most are still teaching balanced literacy, right? So we need system-wide change. We need universities and colleges to change to teaching evidence-based practices and teaching how to read research and evidence so that you can vet, because there's so many things out there that are labeled like here's the newest science of reading curriculum. Whether your state has mandated it or not, you need to be able to vet that material and say, yeah, that does actually align with what I've read for research, or no, it doesn't, right? We also need like current district administration to be willing to admit that they might not have done things right along the way. And often that's hard because lots of money has been put into buying, say, leveled readers or other curriculums, right? So have to both be able to admit it, but also be able to find the money to buy new things, right? And then they also have to be able to find the money to send their people to new professional development and be provided the release time so that they can go to that professional development. So it's this big, like, sweeping system change that has to happen all the way from like grassroots efforts where teachers start to realize that what they're doing isn't maybe the best, and like top down. And it's really hard to be that educator. Like you might have been an educator for 20 years and have been doing your absolute best every single day. And then to find out that what you've been doing isn't necessarily backed by research, like that's a really hard pill to swallow. And so hopefully people subscribe to the know better, do better idea and realize, okay, I maybe didn't do it right, but I didn't know any better. But now I'm going to change this for future students. Whereas sometimes it gets really hard to admit it. And then if you don't admit it, you're actually continuing to do things for all these future students that are coming to you. Right. So yeah, it's really hard and it requires a lot of change management at all levels.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Wow, Brittany, this has been amazing. We could talk about this forever, I think. So we were talking about having you come back on. So I'm looking forward to that. This is such a hot topic right now and so important, especially with like all of the conflicting information because literacy goes back, so many years. It's one of those things where it's been thought to be like widely known and there's multiple disciplines that target it, but as you've mentioned, it's very complex. There's a lot of research that is constantly coming out to kind of challenge our long held beliefs in regards to reading and writing. So I
Yes.
appreciate your perspective.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up today?
I don't think so. Maybe I can just drop my Instagram handle here.
Yeah.
So we are at Language Literacy Clinic MB on Instagram, and that's also our website. So just www.languageliteracyclinicmb.ca. We have a whole bunch of freebies available on our website and a couple of paid materials and one masterclass right now. There should be another couple of masterclasses uploaded, hopefully by end of June into early July. Our school year goes right till the last day of June. So it's a little bit tricky to upload new things there, but yeah, there's lots to explore there, and people can reach out to me on Instagram or by email at any time. I love to chat literacy. Like you said, we could talk forever. I could talk for days on this topic, and I'm really happy to help anybody who has any specific questions at any point.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Brittany. This has been awesome, and I can't wait to connect again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. By the way, have you joined the SSU crew yet? By joining, you get access to the free goods section on our website, plus podcast updates, special event notifications, and therapy inspiration. You can sign up at bit.ly/join SSU crew, all lowercase, or just find the link in this episode description. Also, don't forget to take a screenshot of this episode so that you can always refer back to it and share it on social media if you really love the topic. Take care and remember to always fill your speechy side cup first before you can pour into others.